Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, listener question edition, where there is a lesson in every story. Each week, the team at HR Stories podcast shares questions from our podcast audience and provides tangible, practical advice that everyone can use to get HR right. Our hosts today are management and HR consultants Chuck Simikian and John Thalheimer. What is on your mind today? Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Today's edition is our question and answer.
All right, John, it's good to be here with some Q&A. We've got a bit of a funky delay going on, folks, so bear with us, but we got 3, maybe 4 great questions. Jennifer, Jessica, Kim, and Deborah, all listeners and or on our HR Team of One Facebook page. So, John, would you like me to just shoot and see what answers you have, or do you want to shoot and see what answers I have?
I'm going to shoot and I'm going to ask the questions. These questions I've already answered, and either in Facebook group or back to that person. So I want to see how your answer relates to what I answered, but I'm not going to show you. You're going to answer them blind. How's that? For a little spontaneity tonight. All right.
Shoot.
This first question is from Jennifer, and she asked about this. What about a salary non-exempt who works overtime in 1 week on a bi-weekly payroll and less than 40 hours in the next week? Can you reduce their base hours as they didn't work their full work pay period in the second week?
Wow. Okay. I'm just going to take a shot. See, the whole salary non-exempt thing really kind of screws some things up for folks. So, look, just based on my general knowledge, and folks, I'm going to say, check with your attorney if this is like a real deal for you. But to be on the safe side, I'm going to say no. I would say that salary non-exempt is they're getting a salary. It's like the best of both worlds to be salary non-exempt, because if you work less than 40 hours in a week, you still get the same salary. Okay. You're going to get the same salary week after week after week. The only time that salary changes is if you work more than 40 hours in that week. And so you can get overtime. It's like, I don't know, it's like an employee came up with this idea. Like, oh my gosh, I could work and get overtime and I still get salaried. It's like the best thing in the world. But as far as a lot of times Department of Labor and Wage and Hour Division is concerned, what's your pay week? Not your pay period, your pay week. And that's what you're going to be measuring the overtime on. So you cannot cut back a salary non-exempt. At least you should not. I don't know if there's any absolutely legal things about that, but I believe there are. So you have to continue to pay them week after week, whether they worked 35, 36, 38, or 40 hours in that week. So that's my answer. What did you answer? Because I know you taught payroll law today, so you are probably more plugged in than I am.
And so it's a really interesting question, and I think that your answer is correct. However, there's going to be some exceptions here, right? And so salary non-exempt, for everyone that doesn't know, you get paid the same thing, as Chuck said, unless you work more than 40 hours, right? And so they're being paid, what Jennifer's saying, they're being paid 1 week, they go over 40 hours, they get overtime. The next week, they work 35 hours, they don't get overtime, and maybe they're supposed to work 40 hours in a work week, right? That's their typical schedule. Yeah. And so my feeling is, as Chuck says, the FLSA is about a week, right? It's about a week. So 40 hours, you give them overtime for that week, not there. And so that I think is the correct answer. There's a couple things that I would call out. In certain circumstances in hospital and nursing homes, they are allowed to do a 2-week, 80-hour work week. where they could work 60 hours in one week and 20 hours in the next, and they wouldn't get overtime. But that's a very specific industry standard that we want to be paying attention to. There's also a way to do fluctuating, where the time fluctuates. It's very complicated. I never recommend it to any clients because you have to go through it. And maybe in those cases, then you could do it. So my basic advice to anybody doing salary non-exempt, if somebody works 40 hours in a week, pay them overtime, and then just keep paying them their regular salary because that's what you agreed to. So that's good answer, Chuck. Nice.
All right. Question 2.
All right.
What do you
Question number 2. I think this is an interesting one, quick one. I think it's a quick answer, but I want us to kind of dive deeper into it, Chuck. Just I want to think about the person asking this question and why they would ask it, right? So this is from Jessica. Are you required to give pay increases to all employees?
Well, John, as you always say, yes, no, maybe, it depends because, well, we can never give a straight answer. I guess the easy answer is no, absolutely not. We're not required to give pay increases, but if you give some pay increases to some people and not to other people, what's your basis for that? Could it be tied to a discriminatory act, even though you're not trying to be discriminatory? So I guess it just all depends. What do you say?
Right. And I think that's why this question's interesting. That's why I put it in there, right? Because on the surface, most of us are going to be like, nope, don't need to pay them. Don't have to give them a raise. Why would you give them a raise if you don't want to give them a raise? However, there could be circumstances, right? You could be an under union contract where everyone has to get a raise. You could, as Chuck said, could look like discrimination if you're not giving it to a certain group of people. And so really being careful with that. It's a hard question to ask without all the details. So Jessica, if you want to reach back to us, we can definitely have that conversation. But I do think it's an important thing to kind of think about. It's like, do I need to give everyone raises? I don't think I do, but do I, and then think through that process. And I do, but the other thing that I don't know is how, well, most, and I'm not saying most, I'm not saying all, but most public agencies, like that. Now it's a circular thought. Most public agencies, so government agencies, a lot of them are unionized, right? And so they have some rules and regulations that they need to follow in the public world. I don't know if there's a mandate other than the unions that public people have to get pay raises, right? And so like teachers and that kind of stuff, they're unionized, and so they're all getting a raise. And so kind of seeing that there. So it's just I just thought it was an interesting question, kind of a quick one-off.
Yeah, and Jessica, there's an easy way to get hold of us. Just go to the show notes, and there's a link. You can actually send a direct message text to us, and we look forward to hearing from you. But next, we're going to hear from Kim.
Yeah, Kim. Yeah, so Kim asked, a manager suspects an employee is working for a competitor. They researched her LinkedIn profile and etc. Now they don't have solid proof just yet. We do have a conflict of interest policy. How would you handle this?
Well, I will tell you, having worked in Orlando, a lot of employees work for Disney and Universal, big competitors, right? However, a lot of times they're at lower levels. And I guess the question is, how would we handle it? But it happens, So first of all, I would decide, does the conflict of interest policy reflect, or is it applicable to this situation? Are they a high enough person? Are they insensitive information? That sort of thing. But I guess, John, I would just pull them in and ask them. I would pull them in and ask them and say, hey, are you aware of a conflict of interest policy? There's a rumor, or we heard you might be working for another company. I mean, you just come right out and it might be an educational thing. They might be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Or I didn't think it was a big deal, you know? So I would handle it as, I don't know, you've used a term, I can't remember, it's like as adults, right? Adult conversation, crucial, just handle it like adults. Don't overreact. Just, hey, can I ask you a question? But that's what I would do.
Yeah, and I guess what I would do is also then think about how are you going to handle it. She goes, oh yeah, I'm working for so-and-so. I work for them doing this job, blah, blah, blah. And then how are you going to handle it, right? Are you going to be like, well, you're going to be dismissed then because you're doing it, right? So again, looking at your conflict of interest policy deep in there, diving into that. Also, is there a non-compete policy, right? And so we know they're being thrown out the window, but I do think a non-compete is different than a conflict of interest, and saying you can't, while you're working for us, you can't be working for a competitor, which as a business owner, I think that would be fair. And so having that conversation and knowing that you have to follow through. And so I think this is where we can all learn a lesson, Chuck, because I think what happens is we're like, all right, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to, and we get all this emotional, we get all this exciting. And then when it comes time to it, are we willing to ask that person to leave the company? Right? Are we like, yep, that's fine. We're going to dismiss them because of this. And what does that say to anybody else? Are we doing the same thing? Are we being consistent? There's some things that we need to make sure that we're ready to do if we're going to confront them, like you said, and kind of looking at that.
Yeah, I agree with you. You need to have a plan. You need to already be playing a little more chess, shall we say, ahead of time on if they say this, we do this. If they say so, agree 100%.
And it reminds me, I was working in this corporate job, and one of the things that came up a lot was, can employees work a second job? And my feeling, and I'll love to hear what you think, Chuck, my feeling is like, look, if they're working for me, and this is not for a competitor, but they're just doing a second job, if they're working for me and they're doing their work and they're doing their performance and they're meeting my standards, I don't care what they do outside of work. That's their time. They want to work and do something else, great, let them do it.
Yeah, but if, like you said, if it's truly sensitive stuff, then, but I know, let them do it, let them move forward. But
yeah, I mean, again, right, if it's a competitor or something like that, that's a different story. But
yeah, so what's Deborah have to say? I know Deborah's our final winner.
Deborah wants to know if an employee makes inappropriate comments to another employee on social media outside of work hours, are employers responsible for investigating this? So you have two coworkers working together, and then outside of work on the social media, right? On the social media, I sound like my mama. On that social media over there, they make a comment.
Yeah. Well, I guess it would depend what the inappropriate comment is. So let's break that down. Is it a comment that violates your policies at work? In other words, if they made that comment at work, would they still get in trouble? Would that still be a potential disciplinary situation? When I talk about inappropriate comments, so I had a manager one time that two managers, and one of the managers was dating another manager in another department, and they were hot and heavy, John. I mean, they were like, kissy poo, lovey poo, boom, boom, boom. So the one manager, another female, says to the female manager, one that's dating, says, and they're coworkers, she says, you keep doing that, you're going to end up getting pregnant pretty soon. Well, that was an inappropriate. This girl comes to HR. She says, I'm going to get pregnant. She said, that was inappropriate for her. That was, and I think it was actually her boss, right? And I'm like, yeah, I guess it was. But I don't know if it was, it might be poor organizational decorum. It might be not professional. And she might have even just thought she was being helpful. Inappropriate? Yeah, okay, maybe not. But against policy, illegal? I don't know. So I guess we need to figure out what that inappropriate comment is. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, so but well, let's go. Let's dive in. Let's use some examples. So let's say they make a sexist remark to somebody on the social media feed. I love saying that. On the social media feed. How would you respond? Would you investigate? What would you do? How would you handle that?
Well, it would depend if it was directed towards, if it was directed a sexual harassment comment directed towards a coworker or another employee, yes, you would investigate it. A sexist comment, okay, I guess it might depend. You know, there was a story in the Olympics from a couple weeks ago where, did you hear about this? Well, it was like a French commentator, sports commentator. I guess there was the women's team was behind, or it was a little late in getting started. You're shaking your head, so I'm not sure if you heard this. And I guess the sports commentator off mic, but it was still on, says, well, that's the women for you, taking extra time to get where they need to go, having to put on their makeup and make sure their hair is done correctly. Nice. Okay. That was kind of set, you know, unlike the guys who were always on time. They pulled them off the air. They pulled them off the air. So that's a sexist comment, but not necessarily illegal, you know. So it just all really depends. If it was a sexual harassment, yes. If it was racist, racial harassment, yes. If it was religious harassment, yes, you know. But go ahead.
I understand that at work. So, but if that's happening off premise on social media, are we responsible for our employees' actions?
We're responsible for protecting our employees.
Okay.
So the answer, I guess the short answer is yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't know if that's the advice I gave. Now I think about it. Because I mean, again, right? I mean, people can go out and say things and that kind of stuff, and we don't know how was it said. We don't know, were they friends on Facebook and they said, you know, they said it across Facebook, or did they make a comment on a post that somebody else was following and they, you know, again, we don't know all those details. I think I would do an investigation at least to find out exactly what happened. I'm not sure. Okay, so I find out, hey, this did happen, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure what level of discipline should be in place at that time.
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's what the investigation is. And, you know, the word investigation sounds so heavy, right? It's just simply looking into it and writing off to the say, okay, let me look into it. Let me look into it. You know, I mean, we teach this stuff, right? We talk about the reasonable person standard. Would a reasonable person be offended? Would offhanded comments? And in fact, maybe next week, in our next big episode, I'll tell a story. There was a ruling that came through just recently about an offhanded comment someone made, and they got pulled up for sexual harassment. And I think the court ruled, said something like, look, as an offhanded remark, it's not typical of this person. It wasn't said in like and so they basically, you know, absolved that person. So it just all depends. But yeah, you still should at least look into it.
And the question is it being carried over into work, right? And so if it just happened there, right? And so is it carrying over? How is it impacting the workplace? That's where I think you would get worried about it and kind of doing that. There was a Facebook post the other day that I was reading about where an employee makes a comment at I guess they got a spa treatment, made a comment about how terrible the spa treatment was, blah, blah, blah. And the owner of the spa reached out to the company that the employee was at saying, you need to do something about your employee. What do I, like, I'm not dealing with that. And they didn't deal with it. They're like, nope, not dealing with it, nothing at all. And then it got a little more like harassment. And so they, sort of told the employee to go, you need to talk to the police. This could be stalking, that kind of stuff. Right. And so there's a lot of this with social media. People say things so quickly and don't think about who's hearing it and that kind of stuff. And I just remind everyone, I go back to our early days, Chuck, when we would give swag out to our employees, right? With the company logo on it, go wear this, blah, blah, blah. But remember, when you're wearing it, you're representing the company. And that's the same message I have for people on social media. If you're attached to your company, I work at da-da-da-da-da, then you're representing the company in every one of your social media posts. Whether you like it or not, you are. And so the company has a little skin in the game for those things. And so kind of paying attention to that is really important.
All right. Thank you, Deborah, Kim, Jessica, and Jennifer. Listeners, if you have a question, hit the show notes below and ask us. We will do our best to answer it. Check out the Team of One, HR Team of One community on Facebook. And don't forget, in a few weeks, the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, our latest book, is coming out. Sign up for our newsletter, get some discount coupons, codes, and get a free checklist as a preview of our new book. And of course, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, Question and Answer Edition, where there is a lesson in every question and answer.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.